Hello and welcome to another episode of BAC Channel with Mahesh Daas. In this episode, I've had a wonderful conversation with architect and professor Billie Tsien. I think one thing I found heartening when I met Billie and sat down to talk with her is how accessible and humble she is, and as their work is as well. And from that humility, conversation becomes possible and it becomes a journey. And I think, as I mentioned to her and she mentioned to me, that this is the beginning of a journey, not the end of a journey. And I think there are a lot of beginnings in their work, and beginnings in how she engages the world was very evident in our conversation. And I hope you will come along that journey as well.
We were sort of like in the same space.
Same space, yeah. He's an extraordinarily kind and fearless spirit, I would say. I think MIT, and it is no exaggeration, that MIT was transformed. Not architecturally only, but institutionally, because of his partnership with Chuck West. What they did was a phenomenal reconsolidation or reorganization of MIT. So, a lot of respect, and essentially, I wrote the book he should have written, is how I put it. So that was my way of paying homage to him.
That's good. It's good that somebody, it's actually better that you wrote it than that he wrote it.
Yes. So I was fortunate that I was able to do that. And interestingly, this was all part of my doctorate at Penn. I was doing doctorate at Penn. It was in education, in higher education management. But my dissertation was on MIT, how MIT transformed itself. And so I reached out to Chuck West. And now Chuck West was president from 1990 to 2004. And that was the time also Bill Mitchell was hired. And when I approached Chuck West, he didn't respond for a long time. I said, why is he not responding? But like after a month and a half or something, repeated emails, he finally responded. He said, come to Washington, D.C., and he was the National Academy of Engineering president at that time. So I met with him, and everything in his office was taken down. All the pictures and everything was on the floor. I didn't know what was going on. After like a 2-hour interview, his assistant mentioned to me he had pancreatic cancer, and he had only months to live. So he was going through that, and yet came to meet with me and sat with me, and he passed away about 4 months later. So it was, I caught the last glimpse of it and all the memories, so it was very fortunate timing as well. Of course, by that time Bill Mitchell had passed away. So that was it was quite meaningful to me.
Yeah.
I would say.
Powerful.
Very powerful. I think, of course, the fact that Bill Mitchell and I were in the same subject matter space in terms of design computation and such was one thing, but also in the institutional leadership and transformation. So both ways.
So Valerie talked about that being what you've done here.
Yeah. Well, I hope.
Well, she said that you huge and amazing shifts have happened, both in terms of enrollment and support, financial support. So
thank you.
You are carrying on the banner.
Well, thank you. She is very kind, and I'm fortunate we have a great board of trustees. So I cherish those, all of them, as great resources. For that is what brought me here. When I was considering various opportunities, BAC was one of the opportunities, and there were some amazing ones, and I was trying to decide between them. And I said, I'm going to go where there are people I like to work with. So we have only about 25 full-time faculty, but 280 adjunct faculty. So it takes a village, the entire village of Boston, if you will,
Yeah.
to educate the students and develop partnerships right through their education.
Well, that's what I thought. I mean, when we were talking earlier about sending down deep roots in a place. And I think schools can either send out wide roots or deep roots. And I think not that many schools send down deep roots.
Yeah.
So I think that's one of the reasons that BAC is so so special, because it's entwined with a place.
Yes.
And Boston is rich enough, both in, of course, other academia, but practices, history, that, you know, there's a lot of material to work with.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's, guess one of the things, Billy, when I came here, I mentioned to the community was, you have to realize what are your assets.
Mm-hmm.
That BAC has a lot of assets that you may not realize are yours, but they're actually yours. Like what you said, the resources are there, the history is there, the professional community is here, world-class institutions are here. Like I tell my kids, you know, in Boston, you come to a big university.
Mm-hmm.
The city is the university.
Yeah.
And no matter where you go, you cannot escape that aspect of the city.
Yeah. No, it's a... I was just thinking about how Boston is a big university, but it's also incredible. It's small, so whatever happens is very concentrated.
Yes.
So I was saying my hotel has an anime conference.
Yeah.
And so in checking in, I was thinking, is this some special thing that's happening in Boston? And
Yep.
it was a kind of amazing panorama of costumes until I figured out what was going on. And I thought, well, this is sort of Boston because it allows for that kind of concentrated, I call it idiosyncrasy, but I guess the anime people don't consider it idiosyncrasy. But
Yeah.
it's very, everything that happens here is very, is tightened and concentrated.
Yes.
It's not sort of like an LA spread out. It's just like,
Yes. Yes.
makes it much more intense. And I
Yes.
think education here, of course, is very, very intense.
Yes, absolutely. I think whoever you run into, there are interesting conversations to be had.
Yeah.
No matter who you run into on the street, in the buildings, anywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There is a great intensity, and that amplifies the power of conversations. And I think that's what we enjoy as an environment. So I think I have taught at, I've been and taught at campus town environments where your university is the only thing, versus here
Yeah.
where there is such diversity.
Right, right.
Extraordinary.
Are we having a free-flowing conversation?
Yes.
I want to ask you about your shoes and your socks.
Well, thank you. Well, I think the shoes, definitely Virgil Abloh's shoes, as you probably
Designer?
know, off-white. And I really like them, I think, for the irony and the humor, sense of humor
Yeah.
they bring.
Yeah.
Because he writes shoelace on shoelace,
I didn't see that
which
detail.
is interesting. Yeah. there it
just in
is.
case you didn't
Yeah,
get it.
just in case you didn't get it, it is shoelaces. And just in case you didn't get it, there is a tag,
Yes.
which is elevated to the level of art.
It's a detail.
It's
an
a
important
detail.
detail.
And so, I mean, I think we definitely miss. It's too bad that he has passed away.
Yeah,
But
so young.
He is. I thought it was important to carry that spirit.
Well, what I like very much about your shoes is that, okay, so I meet you. I mean, I've seen you. I've seen your images, and so this is like, okay, this is like what I saw, and then, you know, it's graduation, so you're in a suit, and then it's a little surprising. I like your tie, and then we go down to your watch. It's like, oh, it's like orange. And then we go down to your socks and your shoes, and it's like, wow. So I mean, I think that's a kind. It's a kind of metaphor for the education here.
Yes.
That, you know, you come here, okay, it's a school where you work and you study, but then there's a big surprise.
Yes.
Down at the bottom.
Yeah, thank you. Well, that is absolutely. I never thought that particular way of framing it, but I think that makes sense in many ways.
Well, I mean, I remember when I was in college and we look as young women at the guy's shoes, and from the guy's shoes you could tell if you wanted to, you know, if you were interested in them or not interested in them, because like sometimes you see the shoes and it's like, no way.
Yes. Thank you.
So there's a very interesting shoes.
Thank you.
And be very attractive.
As a president, I am both functional as a president, but also symbolic as a president. So it is personified in some shape and form. It's a message, without a doubt.
Well, I always, whenever we go in for an interview, I always make sure that whatever I wear is colorful.
Yes.
Because architects always dress in black.
Yes.
And it is that universal outfit, and it's just like, I will not wear the universal outfit.
Yes.
Because both, you know, as a woman, as an Asian woman, I want to assert that I am not kind of the fabric necessarily.
Yes.
And so, like your shoes, I want to stand out from the fabric.
Yeah.
But in a subtle way.
Yeah.
I don't wear the anime wigs.
Right.
But I might the next time. Maybe that would get us a job.
Absolutely. Yeah. And a Comic-Con, it goes right with the convention.
I was thinking, is this Comic-Con? But it's anime. In the elevator, I was riding down with a bunch of kids. You know, they had all their name tags on. And so I said, oh, so you're here for the convention, what do you do? And they said, oh, we're with each other, we're with other people who like this. And I said, well, are you going to go to any big screenings? And they just looked at me like, and I realized they never look at anime. I mean, they're looking, this is their screening for anime. And the idea of looking at it on a big screen was very weird to them.
Yes.
But I was thinking, that would be an amazing experience to suddenly have what you've always been seeing on your screen that was this big go across a whole wall and to be able to see it. So I said, give it a try. You should think about it.
Well said. I think the two things, Billie, that you have mentioned and I'm curious about, the connection between color and identity. Could you dwell a little more on that? You talked about that, you know, architects wearing black versus your identity and color.
Well, I was trained in fine arts. That was my undergraduate degree.
Right.
So I always come from I want to be moved. And different things move me. Beauty, of course, moves me. Beauty has to do a lot with color for me. Silence moves me because the world is not silent. So I think when I think about the work in our studio, it has of course, deep roots in a kind of, I would say, modernism, a kind of sense of generally of simplicity, but it also has a very strong connection to texture and color. And I think it's having spent time actually in India, because we had a project there.
Right.
That was a very formative experience, because the project went on for like 10 years.
Wow.
So we must have visited, and because we had an interesting client who said, you must go here, and he had the ability to let us go there.
Right.
We really were able to travel and see so much of the country. And the emotional experience of color was overwhelming.
Yeah.
Tied in with being in a place where at that time, and to some extent it's still true, things made by hand were less expensive than things made by machine.
Yeah.
It's shifting, the world is shifting.
Yeah.
But that experience made me then really treasure those pieces of our physical world which can remind us that people make things, and that emotions are important.
Yeah.
So I think that's how the idea of color comes into both how we think about architecture, but also, I guess, certainly how I dress, how I look at the world, what I'm interested in. Todd and I look much less at architecture and much more at art.
Yeah.
I mean, first of all, it's not threatening to an architect. You don't get jealous. You don't get, it's like, there's so many reasons why it's very freeing.
Yeah.
But there's so many ideas that exist in art that come back to feed us in our work. And I think it's important that students, everyone actually, look at a larger world. And I think, we have a tendency to sort of focus down. Of course, we're focusing at onto a smaller screen, and because, we've been isolated for such a long time, so if the screen isn't this big, it's this big. And what sustains us is the connection to this larger world.
Yes. It's interesting. In India, I would be more curious to learn about your experiences there. At least growing up there, my one of the experiences was, in order to produce color at the scale of the building, you would have to use materials that are indigenous, and the way you produce the color is interesting, because it's not like going to the shop and getting a color and mixing it synthetically, but rather you only have a palette of certain colors that are connected to the material and the making.
Exactly. I mean, we certainly, a visit to Jaipur tells you that.
Right.
And the incredible carving of a stone that is one color, but the variation that happens within the use of that stone is infinite.
Right.
It's interesting, because sometimes I think there's a simplification and a kind of unnecessary codification of sort of material use requirements. Things need to, quote, look the same. And what happens is things look the same. But what's not realized is the ability for the same material to look different.
Yeah.
And I think it's, if you look more deeply at a material, you can find many, many different ways, different lives within it, just like with a person.
Yeah.
you sort of categorize a person when you see them, but the more you know them, the more complex and interesting, the parts of them are. And so I do believe that really working with materials, understanding them. I mean, we always visit the quarries where the stone comes from. Or we always actually go to the brick makers where they make the brick.
Yeah.
And that tells us we learn so much because these people know what the possibilities are.
Yeah.
And that's one of the great things about being in practice is that going back to the realness that happens here is that it's not, you don't fabricate a situation. You're actually, the situation is thrust at you. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I found architecture so much more satisfying than, for me, fine arts.
Yeah.
Because you're relieved of having to make up your own problem.
Yes.
So, as a painter, you have to make up your own problem, then you have to solve the problem, and then you judge your solution or other people judge it. Mm-hmm. But it's all very subjective. And of course, architecture is subjective too.
Right.
But you don't have to make up the problem.
Yeah.
Somebody else has the problem, and then you have to figure out how to address it, how to solve the problem, how to maybe go beyond what the immediate solution is, and make something that transcends the solution. Yeah. The solution, though, is always the most important. If you don't solve the problem, then I feel it's a failure. Because we have a responsibility.
Yes.
And that responsibility, I think, is also a very important part of being an architect. To be responsible not only to yourself, I mean, you're always answering to yourself, but to, first of all, be responsible to other people.
So well said. And I think that cannot be said enough in our educational context, right? That what we're doing is in service of the world and of others, and it's not about us, it's not about inward-looking architectural elite environments that are self-referential.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right, and I think that service orientation, I do find the emerging generations of students have that sense and asking for it and wanting it. I think the realness and the authenticity of such a mission, I think, is what is fascinating here at the BAC, at least, definitely. Going to your experiences in India, you said 10 years is a long time on a project, so you must have made a lot of visits and seen a lot of things, experienced a lot of things as well.
Yeah.
How has that changed what you did, what you do now?
I think in architecture school when I was being educated, and even for so many years afterwards in practice, the word decoration was really like dirty. It's just like decoration. It means it's frivolous. It's unimportant. It shouldn't be part of architecture.
Right.
And I think after being in India, I realized how important decoration is to work. Every single detail, whether it's the gold embroidered edge on the fabric. Yeah. Just that little thin gold embroidered edge changes the whole color.
That's true.
And certainly, I think they never called it decoration. Well, no, that's not true. I think that Louis Sullivan, or even Richardson, there was Richardson had a very robust idea of decoration. Louis Sullivan had a quite more delicate idea of decoration.
Right.
But they appreciated what it could do to enliven the facade. And so I think coming back from India, I realized that decoration is a very important part of architecture. And I, watching the arc of architecture, which was, very Beaux-Arts, then becomes much more through the Bauhaus, much more minimal and about kind of severity and purity. I think there's a place in between. So that's interesting. I feel like that has very much to do with our time in India.
That is fascinating, Billie, because I think in India, decoration is part of storytelling as well, right? So there are narrative connections that expand the narrative within which the building is itself situated, or sometimes the decoration is done with orientation. And certain things can only be oriented in a certain way, where if there are deities in the decorative process, then they orient them in a certain way. They don't face south or whatever. There are rules that govern it. So in that sense, I think you are absolutely right. It is part of a larger system of connecting us to the universe, as well as the cultural narratives. So the universe of human creation and the universe that exists beyond our human creations as well.
It's so interesting because as you say that, the idea of telling stories, so working on the Obama Presidential Center, he and she were very, very interested in the stories. And they always say that we stand on the shoulders of others. The stories of others is very important, and the stories of those who are coming are very important. So this idea of representing stories in architecture, which is absolutely in the tradition of Indian architecture, I think is a kind of subliminal thought as we've worked on the building. So there's a part of the building that's very quiet, which is probably closer to what we've done before. And then there's a part of the building, which is the tower, which is very configured, which is not like what we've done before. And actually we'll have the words from the Selma speech as a huge screen across the top of it. And, people aren't going to be able to actually read the words from the Selma speech because you'd have to walk around back and forth through the building. But it is knowing that the decoration has meaning. It connects to the present and what is now the present, and to 50 years ago, the March on Selma. And so it is the representation of a story in a building, I think, and that is, to me, as I said, comes very much from looking at a lot of Indian architecture.
Oh, that is fascinating. So on the Obama Presidential Center, I find what is fascinating is 2 or 3 things that they have done. One is they have reframed the notion of what used to be Presidential Library to a center. And the second is that in terms of the activity that goes on, and of course the choice of architects themselves is a significant statement that they have done about the importance of all the values that you bring to the table.
Oh, well, thank you. It is true. It has been reframed. First of all, he was our first digital president. So the idea of presidential papers, that are in the dark in a banker's box, don't make any sense anymore. Because what would you do? You would print out the emails and then put them in a box. So so much of the material was digital anyway. So as you probably know, everything is digitized. which then opened up the way, and there's certainly a museum component, because I think it's very important that people wanted to have in the present, but in the future, a place where they could go to pay homage. It needed to be, in a certain way, a powerful, iconic presence, because he is in many ways a subtle person, but I think history asked that it be not so subtle. But it opened up the way for this to be a place of action, and for the programs there to really sort of extend and grow a kind of vision of how people, everyday people, can come together to make the world better, which is certainly something that we're feeling like we all need right now.
Yes, absolutely. How often have you interacted with the Obamas in the process?
In the beginning, very, very often. It was but now not so much. I mean, he has to raise money. You may not know, but presidential libraries, foundations have no federal funding. So it's all privately funded, and because his focus is really actually not the building. Amazingly enough, it's not the building, it's the programs. So he's raising money to endow the programs, and that's a very big, rolling amount, because he wants to make sure that it's very active. So it will, we see him less, but I think he has been very involved in the design. And one of the horrifying things is when you meet a client and they start out by saying, "I always wanted to be an architect," and you go, and he said that, it's like, oh. But he is, as you would expect, very thorough, very prepared, reads everything, and understands drawings. And so the form of the building was a back and forth. Sometimes we didn't think his ideas were so good. Many times his ideas were actually very good. And so now we just have to make it happen.
As a client, was he, when his ideas were not good, how did he take it when you tell them these are not good ideas?
He was reasonable. It was a discussion, so it was never, it must be this way. He and she are very, very interested in art. He talked about the building in quite sort of abstract terms. So it wasn't as if like there should be, it should be slanted here. It was more about can it feel essential? Can it feel like a Brancusi? So it was the kind of, generally it was the kind of discussion that gave you a kind of goal, but let you figure out your way of getting there, which is the best direction from a client when they have a vision, but they don't say you have to do this, this, and this, but it says, can we share this vision? If we had this vision, how do we, show me how you would get there.
I see. And in terms of materiality of this project, how has that dimension come into play in translating that vision?
Well, I mean, we started out thinking, we want to make a building that at the minimum is a 200-year building. Everything that we do has as a foundation this desire to make something last. You have a headquarters, your school is in a building that is a 200-year-old building. The brick building, I think it's a 200, So we want our building to be a 200-year building. And I think in terms of materials then, many people said, well, he's been very transparent, very open, it should be a glass building.
Mm-hmm.
And to us, that wasn't a 200-year building. 200-year building needed to us to feel more solid.
Yeah.
And because we're interested in stone, and we're always interested in buildings that have a kind of weight.
Yes.
So it's brick, it's stone, it's concrete, and I understand, there are issues which are about carbon sequestration.
Yeah.
And about carbon allotment. And I think that there's a kind of balance between, let's say, immediate carbon usage and whole life, which isn't trying to be a cop-out, but saying there's the immediate and then there's the long-term. And if you believe in the long-term, which we believe is true of this particular place, then you have to look at it over a much longer time span.
Yeah.
So we have used, it's stone, it's a granite from Western Massachusetts. At first we were looking at stone from all over the world because we think of him as an international person, but they felt it should be an American stone, so we looked at a lot of American stones.
Yeah.
And so it's a stone and concrete building. And it
Wonderful.
better be there in 200 years when I go for a walk.
I think I wanted to chat about, if I could, there's some connection between your work and Lou Kahn's work, notwithstanding the fact that there's some other projects that are in close proximity to Kahn's work, and so that's one thing that I'm curious about, both not just the physical proximity, but proximity of values, approaches, and perhaps the underlying tenets of what you do as well.
Well, I mean, he's such a myth. And you went to Penn. So you were enveloped in the myth, both of the life, which was complex, the buildings, and I would say the idea of trying, and one can never really accomplish this, but trying to go beyond time, I think is something that's very important. I think it's interesting to look at his early drawings when he was at the American Academy in Rome. They're really ugly.
Yeah.
And his early drawings for any project are really clumsy. So you feel that what he was searching for wasn't easy. I don't know that we have been brave enough to start out really clumsy and really ugly. Although maybe that's not true.
That's
we
interesting.
just don't.
That is fascinating what you just said.
Yeah.
Yeah, please.
Well, I'm just saying that it is, he talks about the search, and he talks about the immeasurable.
Yes.
And I think for us, those are the important lessons.
Yes.
The search and the immeasurable.
Yeah.
And, of course, metrics are really important now.
Yeah.
It's like, how many clicks did you get?
Yeah.
Even amongst so many students, this idea that if you can somehow quantify things, you capture the spirit.
Yeah.
But spirit will always be immeasurable.
Right.
And so I think those are things that we think about. Of course, the idea of weight also is very important. So that for us is very much coming from thinking about Khan.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fascinating, because I thought that if there is a certain kinship, unmistakable, at least from my perspective.
That makes me really, I feel very
right? And
gratified.
I'll explain why. I'm pretty sure people may have mentioned this to you before or not, but I think that I once wrote something called Architecture, Speed, and Relativity. The idea is that there are phenomena that are space-like phenomena, or space-time-like phenomena, or time-like phenomena, and that depending on the speed of the phenomenon, it moves from either space-like or time-like. There is a spectrum of experiences, and when we talk about presence, and of course Kant talks about presences, and presence is about being in the present. And to have the presence means it is a space-like phenomenon. That, and in order to do that, in the backdrop of a lot of time-like phenomena, which we are now enveloped by, is a significant work. So in that sense, interestingly, I think your approach and Kant's approach has been to really bring to the presence through, by slowing things down, as you talk about, and as he also does, but also to evoke through the materiality and the use of stone or concrete or a variety of other materials that are very thoughtfully, tangibly bring into existence certain tactile experiences, and the sculpting of light, most importantly, that it's unmistakable how in both of your works, the sculpting of light and treating light as actually a material, part of the palette, is very interesting. I don't know, I mean, have you considered that there's something that brings you together, both at Phillips Exeter Academy and at the Scripps Institute and a variety of other contexts?
Of course, one's totally aware of working in the shadow when we're so close by. And I think for me, sometimes I feel like, well, sometimes the symmetry of Khan I find a little difficult. But in Dhaka, it was amazing and unbelievable and almost hallucinogenic. But the values, I think, for which he was searching, I think they're very similar values.
I think it's very well said, because I do find that in your work, you break the symmetries in a very organic, through a very organic process, right? I find that very interesting, and you're absolutely right. In Kant's work, there's a lot of rigidity in the structure and symmetry, and in your work, you may start out that way, but actually you end up generating quite a complexity through the conversations of various voices involved. As you said, there are two voices, there are many voices, and all of those voices come through in your work. And that's what I find fascinating. It's almost like it continues that conversation and takes it to another level.
Well, thank you. That's a huge compliment, and I will remember that and tell Todd.
Absolutely. I think it's unmistakable in terms of how the importance of slowness, and that is where I say space-like phenomena, where we experience ourselves by being present, like we are present at this very moment. And having presence means that we have the ability to experience it, taking the time to experience it, as opposed to yielding to time, and just moving beyond. So I think I find those very interesting. In the Barnes Foundation building, which is the most recent ones that I have visited, I think that experience is unmistakable, where it's at once, I think, the care you have taken to select the materials and choose the materials and how you move through it. It's unmistakable. It's timeless and at the same time timely.
Mm.
And it just allows for us to be in powerful ways.
Well, thank you so much.
So one last question perhaps is, you talk about, and this is, let's talk about beauty, and a topic that a lot of architects or designers might shy away from, but you don't, and I'm glad you don't. What does it mean to you, beauty, and why is it important to approach the work through that angle?
Personally, it really feeds my soul.
Yeah.
It takes me away from, the headlines I'm reading on my phone.
Yeah.
It just makes me feel alive in many different ways.
Yeah.
And it can't all things can't be beautiful, and it can't be beautiful all the time because you
Yeah.
don't actually want it to be beautiful. It needs to, in a certain way, catch you unawares.
Mm.
I mean, because it's just like sometimes you see something beautiful and it's like somebody slapped you in the face.
Mm.
Just like,
Mm.
beauty makes me feel alive. I think beauty makes
Yeah.
people feel alive.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about things you expect or things you are told to expect or things you are told to see. It's those things that you see out of the corner of your eye that make you feel like crying.
Yeah.
And that doesn't happen all the time.
Yeah.
But when it does, it's an amazing experience.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. I'm reminded of Gregory Bateson's observation that in a work of art, the artist becomes part of the experience. There is the distinction between that which is experienced, the experiencer is erased,
Mm-hmm.
that you become one with the work.
Yeah.
And that moments of beauty allow us to experience ourselves
Yeah.
as one with, and thus be extraordinarily joyous
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
that moment, right? That I find, I think, in many of your works, those moments are very, very interesting, and there are just many moments, right? And I think you talk about that, and be it a little courtyard, little bench, and be it a little detail of the handrail or the doorknob, everywhere it is manifested.
Mm.
It's lovingly crafted
Thank you.
as well, as
Thank
you
you.
talk about the importance of craft, the importance of every detail being thoughtfully made, and everything asks us to be present. Not the past, not into the future, but just be present. Present to it, present to ourselves. And is that what you would refer to as soul of architecture? You talk about that in a variety of contexts.
I do think that for me is very much the soul of architecture. Yes.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for honoring us by accepting our invitation and speaking with me and to speak with our students. I think this is a moment that I will cherish, that you are present here with us and to us.
Thank you. Well, this conversation was a gift.
Thank you. Thank you, Billie. I appreciate it. So we'll talk more, I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
This is only the beginning of a conversation,
Okay.
not the end of it. And as your buildings and your work shows, you have many conversations. So I look forward to more, and that hopefully you'll visit us more
Yes.
in the future.
Yes.
And all the best
Thank you.
to all the exciting work that you do and important work that you do.
Oh, well, thank you.